This is a recitation by Professor Kashinath Nyaupaney from bodhisvara.com.
Sri Aryanagarjuna kritam madhyamaka sastram prarabhyate.
Shri Aryanagarjuna kritam madhyamaka shastram prarabhyate. Shri is an honorific prefix, it means light, but at the same time in this context it just means the honourable or the reverend or something like that. Arya means Aryan, noble. Nagarjuna is the name of the 14th patriarch, counting from Master Mahakasyapa as number 1 and Ashvaghosha as number 12. Shri Arya Nagarjuna Kritam. Kritam means written, literally means made, composed, written. So written by the noble Nagarjuna. Shri Arya Nagarjuna Kritam Madhyamaka Shastram. Shastram means book or treatise, and Madhyamaka means the middle. So Madhyamaka Shastram, the treatise of the middle, and that is nominative, neuter, singular, and so Kritam, composed, agrees with Shastram, the book, the treatise. So Shri Arya Nagarjuna Kritam Madhyamaka Shastram, so the treatise of the middle, composed by the noble Nagarjuna. Prarabhyate, that is passive, third person singular passive of prarab, and prarab means to commence, to begin. So prarabhyate is begun, is commenced. Shri Arya Nagarjuna Kritam Madhyamaka Shastram Prarabhyate. The treatise of the middle, composed by the noble Nagarjuna, is begun. So in beginning it, I'll just give you a little bit of the background, how I come now to be presenting this translation, this text and translation, following the recitation there on bodhisvara.com. In a sense, my whole life has been a preparation for translating into English Nagarjuna's treatise on the middle, whose full name is usually given as Mula Madhyamaka Karika. And Mula means root, fundamental. Madhyamaka means the middle. So Madhyama means the middle, and Madhyamaka is like the adjective from that. And or you could say middlemost, Madhyamaka, middlemost. And then Karika means verse. And traditionally, the way that, say, the 12th patriarch Ashvaghosha wrote 2 epic poems, Saundrananda and Buddha Charita. And I guess, in a sense, that this is following in that tradition of Buddhist teacher composing verses in Sanskrit. And these are root verses that a student would have learnt off by heart and based his or her understanding of the teacher's teaching based on these kind of concise distillations of the teaching. So that's the meaning of root or fundamental. They're the root of a whole lot of study. So they're not commentaries. They're more the distillation of the teaching, the essence of the teaching. So Mula Madhyamaka Karika, the middle in root verses. So when I was living in just the suburbs of Tokyo, a place called Bushi, after I just started a family, moved out of Tokyo and was working intensively on Shobo Genzo translation. Slightly before that, my Zen teacher Guro Nishijima had become very interested in Sanskrit, in Nagarjuna in particular, and he bought me this book, Teach Yourself Sanskrit. He sent it to me while I was living in, sent it by post while I was living out in Bushi. So it was an encouragement to me to start studying Sanskrit. And it wasn't very welcome at the time because I was up to my eyeballs in translating Shobogenzo. But he also sent me this. It's Nagarjuna, a translation of his Mula Madhyamaka Karika with an introductory essay by Kenneth K. Inada, State University of the New York at Buffalo, published in 1970. And you can see the little thing that Nishijima Sensei included here. The comments and translations are unreliable, and so please use as original texts, with the compliments of Gudo Wafu Nishijima. So you can see his intention was that I would translate Nagarjuna, and I didn't get round to it for various reasons. Our translation partnership was sort of dislocated in around 1997. Before that, my intention had been to study Sanskrit, but I lost the will to carry on serving him, which in retrospect was regrettable, but that's the way it was. And so I didn't actually start studying Sanskrit until our relationship had until it was clear that our translation partnership had totally broken down, and that if I was going to do it, I was going to do it on my own. So from 2008, I started studying Sanskrit by starting studying Ashvaghosha's epic poems. That's how I taught myself Sanskrit, by relying on especially the translations of E.H. Johnson, Oxford professor of Sanskrit, and with a very reliable literal translator. So I could use his translations as a way of studying Sanskrit, learning how to translate Sanskrit. And so for about 7 years, I translated Soundarananda. Deliberately, I went slowly, so as I could really enjoy it, because the Shobogenzo translation was always done with a great sense of urgency. Nishijima Sensei was getting old, and he wanted to get it published. And in retrospect, I can see why. His movement, depended on having that translation, and he wanted it as soon as possible. But for me, it meant I was under quite a degree of stress, having to translate Shobogenzo and earn a living at the same time as having just started a new family. And those were the conditions that led me to become a teacher of the Alexander technique, because the Alexander technique is all about putting the process before eagerness to get a result. So it's quite ironic, really, that I came to the Alexander technique as a kind of antidote to Buddhist translation work. So from 2008 to about 2015, I very slowly went through Ashvaghosha's 2 epic poems, and they've been published. You can find them if you Google Ashvaghosha Soundarananda or Ashvaghosha Buddha Charita. You should find them published with the help of Ananda Jyoti Bhikkhu. You could Google Mike Cross Abandoning Ideas. That's the title of the web page where you can find those. So after that, I knew that I was going to start attacking Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika I began a blog called Back to the Middle of Nagarjuna, which practically nobody's ever visited, but you can trace my laying the foundations for this translation on that blog, going back to the original Pali Suttas, and I also translated Ratnavali and studied Vyagra Vardhani Vrita, the prose works. Ratnavali's verse, not all of which is extant in Sanskrit, and VVV is prose works. But then I couldn't really get going with the translating MMK, Mula Madhyamaka Karika, in earnest until March or April 2017, when on bodhisvara.com these recitations by Professor Kashinath Nyalpane were published. And while I was doing the Asvaghosa translation, I was always aware that something was missing, because I couldn't hear the sound of the poetry. So I could hear Ananda Jyoti Bhikkhu's recitations from the Pali of Buddha's teaching, and I could hear, Sanskrit recitations of, let's say, old Vedic texts or the Upanishads or whatever. But I was never really too interested in studying those. So it was a big moment for me when the MMK was published by bodhisvara.com. It'd be great if they would get the recitation done similarly of Asvaghosa's poetry as well. But so from that time on, I started, my method of approaching it was learning the verses off by heart, and I'd already been doing that for the Asvaghosa translation, but these ones I could learn them off by heart and in the original sound and cadence and rhythm by parroting the reciting of Professor Kashinath Nyalpane. So I'd recommend that method to anybody else. So I spent 2017 in France learning one or two verses off by heart every day and translating them into English. And then 2018, I somehow knew that I wasn't ready to publish them yet. And so I was back in Norwich with my wife in November 2018, just gone, and my intention was to sit on the bed and recite chapter 26 just for my own benefit with my MacBook that I've got in front of me now, my MacBook Air. I was intending just to recite it for my own benefit, and then it just suddenly occurred to me that I could just hit the iMovie icon and record what I was reciting. So actually I was feeling quite out of balance at the time, and so it wasn't a case that I reached a point of inner calm where I felt I was ready to start doing these videos. Quite the opposite. It was like I needed to do something useful to put my mind at rest, and so that's what I'm doing now. Starting off right at the beginning, prarabhyate means is commenced, is commencing. Shri Harya Nagarjuna Kritam Madhyamaka Shastram Prarabhyate. A treatise, the treatise on the middle of the middle, composed, written by the noble Nagarjuna, is commencing, is being commenced, is being started. So we're going to start by examining the title of the first chapter. Whether these titles were chosen by Nagarjuna or by a later editor of the text is not clear. There's a lot of many of the titles have got different versions in different texts, although this one is accepted to be titled pratyaya-parīkṣā. So here's the recitation of the chapter title.
Atha pratyaya-parīkṣā nāma prathamaṁ prakaraṇam.
Atha pratyaya-parīkṣā nāma prathamaṁ prakaraṇam. So atha means and then or next. You won't find that word in the written text. It's just addition for the recitation. So atha, and then, next. Pratyaya-parīkṣā. Parīkṣā is the verbal root is iksh, which means to look at, and pari means fully or thoroughly. So parīkṣā, iksha is the noun, the feminine nominative singular noun. So iksha means looking, parīkṣā, looking thoroughly. In other words, for example, here in this book, in his first translation, Inada translated it as examination. He translated the title of the first chapter, Examination of Relational Condition. Relational condition. And the word he's translated as relational condition is pratyaya. Pratyaya-parīkṣā. Examination of relational condition in Ada's translation. But as with characteristic directness, Udo Nishijima wrote, the comments and translations are unreliable, and that is true. So parīkṣā, examination, well, yeah, examination is not bad, but it's rather intellectual, isn't it? Even worse translation of parīkṣā is analysis, which suggests separating it into different separate parts, which is completely misleading. Investigation is better. It's something more practical. But the translation I prefer by a long way is exploration, because we don't know what we're studying. And so the word that expresses that for me is exploration. And then pratyaya is pratyaya. In the phrase hetu pratyaya, hetu means direct or primary cause, and pratyaya means indirect or secondary causes. Or in other words, conditions. So hetu pratyaya is often well translated causes and conditions, or cause and conditions. So most translations will have pratyaya-parīkṣā translated as something like investigation of conditions. But the trouble with that is condition sounds, it takes away the sense of causality. And what Nagarjuna is really interested in here, you see, what the Buddha was really interested in was how suffering came about. And the Buddha found that suffering didn't have separable, specific, self-existing causes, but rather it was dependently arisen. So it was dependent on empty things. Well, dependent on empty variables, not things, because things suggest what's not empty. So suffering is dependently arisen from ignorance, from samskaras, from divided consciousness, from psychophysicality, etc., etc., as described in chapter 26. But each of those 12 links in the chain of dependent arising of suffering is empty. Those links are not 12 self-existing things. So dependent arising, Nagarjuna uses the example of a firebrand. You know, when you see the circle of light of a firebrand, you can't separate it into 12 elements. A firebrand means like as kids we had sparklers on bonfire night, and you would see the figure of 8 pattern being made by the sparkler or whatever. So pratyaya comes from the verbal root prati. E means to go, and prati means back. So pratyaya suggests what things go back to. So the Buddha found that suffering goes back to ignorance, samskaras, divided consciousness, psychophysicality, contact, the 6 sense organs, contact, etc., etc. Suffering goes back to those factors. And not only suffering goes back like that, everything. Okay, so my existence, which in my ignorance, I feel to be an individual psychophysical unity. When we look into it, what is this thing? It goes back to my breakfast. It goes back to the oxygen the trees behind me are producing. It's dependently arisen. It doesn't exist as a thing unto itself. It's empty. It's dependently arisen. It means the same thing. So pratyaya-parīkṣā means exploration of that, exploration of what things go back to. So pratyaya can also mean belief, because it's what you go back to. It's like when the Jews through history have gone wrong, what did they go back to? They went back to their belief in God. Well, that's an example of pratyaya. So when you understand that, that's why Nagarjuna started with that, the most fundamental thing there is. These are the middle in the fundamental verses. So it's a fundamental exploration of the middle. So he starts that root exploration with what the things go back to. Okay, so the conditions misses the target, doesn't it? If you understand it like that, because conditions sort of sounds peripheral things. No, so what he's really talking about is causation. So in a Sanskrit compound, pratyaya-parīkṣā, pratyaya could be single or plural. In a compound, you don't know if the intention is to be single or plural. So it could be exploration of causes. It could be exploration of causation. But pratyaya also means the grounds, the motivation is included. Hetu is more strongly suggestive of motivation. Your primary motivation is your hetu. But pratyaya also includes that meaning, what the motivating grounds of things. So for the moment, I just translated it as exploration of cause. Try to leave it somewhat ambiguous. Exploration of cause. You could call it exploration of causality or exploration of causes. The problem with causes is it sounds like you're talking about separate, a plurality of different causes, which is somehow misleading. So to get around that, we'll call it exploration of cause. Pratyaya-parīkṣā. The nāma means by name. So titled. Ata pratyaya-parīkṣā nāma prathamaṁ prakaraṇam. So prakaraṇam is from the verbal root kri, to do or to make. So karanam means doing, making, and prakaraṇam, the verbal prefix pra, is emphatic or it doesn't mean anything. So prakaraṇam means something being made, a composition. Actually it means a chapter. And the prathamaṁ means the first. Prathama means the first. So prathama prakaraṇam, the first chapter. Ata pratyaya-parīkṣā nāma prathamaṁ prakaraṇam. Then chapter 1, titled Exploration of Cause.